On May 31st, Atma Classic released a brand new recording of Haydn's two terrific cello concertos. The disc also features music of iconic Canadian composer Jacques II, his rondo for cello and orchestra. The recording features the outstanding Canadian cellist Cameron Crozman and Le Violon du Roi, led by Nicholas Ellis. Called a musical force to be reckoned with, cellist Cameron Crozman is no stranger to Winnipeg audiences. He has performed with our Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra a couple of times and has performed as part of the Virtuosi concert series. He has shared the stage with the likes of violist Gerard Cosset, members of the Eban Quartet, and violinists James Ennis and Augustine Hadlick, to name just a few. This recording of Haydn's cello concertos is nothing less than remarkable. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about his latest recording, I am joined by the cellist Cameron Crozman. Hey, Cameron, nice to meet you
Hi,
here over Zoom.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
So, the first thing I want to ask is, where are you right now? Where am I speaking to you from?
I'm actually at home. I'm at home in Montreal, which is unusual. I feel like I spend more time outside of home than here, but I have a week here at home, which is really nice.
Oh, fantastic. So the Haydn Cello Concerto disc is out. How does it feel to have this recording out into the world?
Oh, it's really great. It's a project that we recorded it last June, so it's been sort of in the works for a long time. And of course, these are projects that take a long time to put in place. So it's been many years since the first conversation about this CD, and I'm really pleased with the result of everyone's performance. It was like so inspiring to be surrounded by the musicians of Les Violons du Roi. They're just, I think, one of these treasures of our country. Such an amazing group. Nicolas, one of the great Canadian young conductors. And so I was really fortunate to be able to make this CD.
So, how did it all come together? I mean, the Haydn cello concertos, they're such staples of the cello literature now. Whose idea was it to record the two cello concertos and record it with Le Violon du Roi? Can you talk about that process a bit?
Yeah, so it was definitely, I would say, before this, I had released a number of CDs. I had released three CDs, and they were all sort of more in the world of 20th century music. So there was
Mm,
some French 20th century music. There was the Britten cello suites, which are from the late 20th century, and then an album of Spanish music, which is more accessible, but a lot of it is still sort of that early 1900s era. And so I wanted to do something more uh, of a different era, more classical or Baroque or something. And one of the ideas I'd had was to do these Haydn concertos because I've been playing them since I was a teenager. So I know them well. In fact, the C major concerto was the very first piece I ever played with orchestra.
oh, wow.
So it sort of felt right. And I noticed that Les Violons du Roi, they have a huge discography, but they had never recorded the Haydn concertos. And so I just sort of proposed it to them one day, and they said yes, which is amazing. And then we made it work.
Fantastic. I watched an interview that you did with us a while ago. It was just ahead of your first performance with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. You were playing Dvorak Cello Concerto. One of the things that came up in the interview was how much you enjoy historical minutia behind the music you were playing. Both of the Haydn cello concertos have great historical backstories. Can you talk a little bit about the backstory? And we start with the first cello concerto in C.
For sure. Well, so the C major concerto, what's interesting, I think there's two facets. One is that these concertos are from different periods of Haydn's life, so they're different styles of Haydn's output. The other is that their transmission to us today is very different.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll actually start with the D major, which we've known of since it was written. We have a very early published parts. Cellists throughout the 19th century played it. They arranged it as they saw fit because they found it to be sort of too Rococo style. And so there's some people who reorchestrated it. They added these extravagant cadenzas, and it wasn't until the 20th century when people sort of started saying, well, maybe we should go back to what Haydn originally wanted. And so there's this interesting transmission of the D major concerto where it goes first through the lens of the 19th century and Romanticism, and then we bring it back to maybe a more historically informed approach now. But the C major concerto was lost until the 1960s, and it was rediscovered in a library in Prague. And so, which is hard to believe now because I think every cellist on the planet must play the C major concerto. But
Uh,
a couple generations ago, no one had it. We knew it existed because Haydn kept a thematic catalog, but it was sort of this miraculous discovery. I think one musicologist even called it the greatest musical discovery of the 20th century. I don't know about that, but And so in that sense, it's a very different transmission too, because we go immediately into like a 20th century view of this concerto. We don't have any of this extravagant 19th century baggage with it. And so I tried to also um, maybe be sensitive to that when I was recording the pieces, especially also that the C major concerto was earlier. It's like you can tell we're coming out of the Baroque still. There's something a little bit simpler about the cello writing. The D major concerto, we're really in this galant, rococo, late 18th century style, and very, very different cello writing.
I was reading, apparently the second cello concerto for a while was attributed to the cellist Anton Kraft. They actually thought he wrote it. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that is true. We found the manuscript. They found the manuscript sometime in the 20th century, which confirmed that it was by Haydn. But I think probably what people were reacting to was that the cello writing is so idiomatic in the D major concerto and so incredibly difficult. It really feels like you needed to be a cellist to write something like that. And we knew that Kraft was a cellist in the court of Esterhazy, where Haydn was working. So I'm sure that's sort of where that idea came from. But I think the music is really much superior to the music that Kraft left us. So I'm glad it was confirmed as Haydn 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. La Villa du Roi are such a fabulous chamber orchestra. What was it like to record with them?
Oh man, it was a dream. It was like totally a dream come true. I heard them play for the first time when I was growing up in London, Ontario, and they came and played a concert of Vivaldi concertos. I think they did the Four Season and some other concertos, and I was just blown away. They're a very interesting ensemble because they have a historically informed approach, but they use modern instruments set up with steel strings, not gut strings. They use Baroque bows, so they're sort of this hybrid ensemble, which I found really
Mm,
interesting. That was another thing that attracted me to them as a partner for this CD because I'm not an early music specialist, but I've dabbled in it and I'm interested in taking a look at this music through a historically informed approach. And they sort of fit that in a nice way where there was that historical informed side, but also with modern instruments and all of the sort of brilliance that those modern instruments bring to a performance.
mhm. It leads to the next question. I mean, one of the things about the CD is you actually are playing on a cello that you borrowed from one of your former teachers,
Yeah.
Paul Pulford. Can you talk about that cello? And is that why you chose to do the recording on that instrument?
No, so the cello was more, that was just the cello I happened to have at the time. It was a long story. I was between different sort of loans of instruments, and there was a moment when I didn't have, I have a modern instrument of my own, but it wasn't the right instrument to do a project like this on. And so I was very lucky that my teacher, Paul Pulford, he has a beautiful 19th century Bernadelle cello. Bernadelle, who's a French luthier and he lent it to me for a good chunk of last year for my concerts and for this recording. And I realized actually during the recording that there was something really special about that in a way I hadn't expected because I learned the concertos with Paul primarily, and so I remember having the lessons facing that cello, hearing the concertos for the first time, being taught them with that cello that I was now playing on
Uh,
for this recording, which was really special and in a way very unexpected because that was not at all planned.
yeah, it
Yeah,
sounds great on the recording.
thank you.
Uh, One of the real knockouts for me after listening to this was the Jacques 2 Rondo for
Mm.
cello. It is just excellent. Where did you discover this piece? And can you talk about it? It has these wonderful driving and fun rhythms. And he apparently wrote it when he was just 27. Where did you find out about this piece?
Yeah, so this was actually all thanks to Nicolas Ellis, the conductor on the album. He had discovered this piece as part of another project that was supposed to happen during the pandemic, never happened, but he had had parts made because before that it was just a manuscript score in archives, I think, somewhere. It had never been played or recorded since when it was premiered in the 1960s, and it was this amazing sort of pairing because we were looking for something to go with these two concertos, and it was just sort of the perfect piece. It was the right length, and it captured that sort of neoclassical style that goes really well with Haydn's music, and it's a fabulous piece of music. So I'm glad we recorded it.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great piece. Did he record a cello concerto?
I don't
A2?
think so. I'm not sure, but I don't know for sure, but I don't think so.
Because he was such a fantastic composer and a
Mm.
very prolific composer. I was just sort of wondering about that. One of the other things about that I was reading in the booklet is You and Nicolas Ellis and Olivier Landubois, you acknowledge the presence of Pierre Morin. Who was he? And can you talk about him and why it was so important that he was there for the recording of the A2?
Yeah, so he was one of the early cellists involved in the performance of this piece. So actually, when we were preparing for it, the only archival recording we had of the piece was with him playing.
Mm,
We learned later through writing the program notes, or the person who wrote the program notes learned that there were a couple other cellists that seemed to have played the piece when it was written,
yeah.
but Pierre was the one that we knew about, and he lived in Quebec City where we were doing the recording, so we decided it would be great to have him come and listen to the session. I think we were in a way hoping that he would also share some insight, but it turns out, and of course we should have thought of this, it was 60 years ago that he played the piece. So he didn't remember much about having played it himself, but it was really cool to have him there and share a couple stories of A2.
Fantastic. You studied for several years in Paris. Do you still travel to Europe often? And while you're in Europe, do you feel the need to champion Canadian music at all?
Hmm. I do actually. I'm glad that I do get back to Europe a fair number of times. It varies per year, but actually I'm heading off to France in just a week's time for a Friends Festival outside of Paris. And I do try to play Canadian music when I can. There's not always the opportunity, but I was in Paris actually earlier this year performing at the Canadian Cultural Center there. They have a beautiful building with a sort of auditorium space. And
Mm,
there I did some European premieres of Canadian music that had been written for me for solo cello. So when the opportunity presents itself, I do like to include music from here.
fantastic. It's just been such a treat to talk to Cameron about this latest disc. It is just fantastic. I'm going to wrap things up by asking, what do you have planned for the summer? You're talking about this concert in just outside of Paris.
Yeah.
Are you performing in any other festivals this summer?
Yes, it's a busy summer. I feel like it's already started. I just got back from the Scotia Festival of Music in Halifax,
Mm-hmm.
where I was for the last 2 weeks. This week I'm in Montreal, both to be at home, but also for the Montreal Chamber Music Festival. As I mentioned, I go off to Paris next, and then sort of a flurry of concerts in different places. I play in Ontario at the Elora Festival, the Festival of the Sound, Music
Mm,
Niagara, and a little bit further afield for Early Music Vancouver in August, and also for the Guston House series in Saskatoon. So I'm making my way to most of the provinces, not most of the province, but a good number of the provinces this summer.
yeah, absolutely. Cameron, this latest CD that you've recorded is fantastic and is now in full rotation here in Winnipeg. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. And hopefully, we'll be talking again when the disc, crossed fingers, gets nominated for a Juno. Thanks for taking the
We
time
will
to
see.
talk to
Thank
me.
you so much. Thank you.